Renew Northeast is a nonprofit member organization governed by clean energy industry and leading environmental organizations. Together, Renew provides a single, coherent voice advocating for responsible clean energy solutions. Driven in large part by state policy, electrification, and decarbonization goals and mandates, New England is undergoing a seismic shift in our energy landscape. In order to meet many of our energy and climate goals, we are going to need an estimated additional 2 to 3 times the generation and 3 to 4 times the transmission infrastructure. To date, there have been more than 36 bills and regulatory dockets addressing this transition. Currently, there are 6 proposed transmission projects which could bring an additional 10,000 megawatts of clean energy into New England. With this in mind, Renew is building a network of community leaders, organizations, and individuals who are invested and interested in ensuring that local voices and perspectives are part of the dialogue. We recognize that communities have a lot on the line, and Renew wants to share our resources and knowledge to amplify local perspectives. Scan the QR code to join our mailing list to receive timely updates on policy and regulatory changes, events, and issues important to you. Before we introduce our panel, a few housekeeping items. The chat function is disabled for this webinar. If you have a question for the panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel for this evening. First, I'd like to introduce Chris Rodstrom. Chris, would you like to say a few words of introduction?
Yes, thank you, Nathan, and thanks to Renew Northeast for hosting this important event. I'm the founder and principal consultant at CVR Energy Solutions, where I work with developers, utilities, and communities to plan and permit clean energy infrastructure across New England and New York. And when we talk about keeping the lights on, we're really talking about maintaining reliability during an historic transition of our electric grid. The grid we built decades ago wasn't designed for the rapid electrification of heating, transportation, and data-driven industries we're seeing. And to meet that demand, we need new transmission lines and substations and smarter local solutions. And I spent a lot of time at the intersection of engineering, permitting, and community engagement, and I see a shift happening, and I'm looking forward to talking about how that's taking place and having that discussion with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And now I'd like to introduce our second panelist for the evening, Kevin Galligan. Kevin?
Thanks so much, Nathan and Chris. Good to be with you on this webinar. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kevin Galligan. I live on the outer portion of Cape Cod, Massachusetts, so we are definitely always aware of grid reliability and the importance of keeping lights on, for sure, with the northeast storms that we get and other things. But my background is in the energy field. I was looking at the calendar and the years go by, but certainly over 40 years of being involved in energy, seeing transformation in so many different areas in natural gas, nuclear, fossil. And my last 10 to 15 years have been dedicated on energy efficiency and cleaner fuels for our future. I also am fortunate to represent my little community as a select board member. And also I was able to put a lot of my energy skills to good use when Governor Deval Patrick selected me to be the public sitting member on the Energy Facility Siting Board. And I think we made some good decisions, and I'm seeing the results of those in terms of transmission projects that are now up in service, and I played a little role in that. But I'm really excited to be with everybody today. And just a little trivia point. As you can tell, I don't have any hair left because I've gotten through the years of a lot of hard work, and you lose hair when you just are nonstop working. But I can actually say I remember exactly where I was in the 1965 great blackout in the Northeast when a little I think hydroelectric malfunction occurred at Niagara Falls and rippled through. So I didn't get a chance to answer that grid question, but if I did, that would have been my recall, a great Northeast blackout.
Thank you, Kevin. So let's dive right on in. What comes to your minds when we talk about the grid? Chris, I'll turn to you first.
I think the electric grid is often called the most complex machine ever built. It's the technology and the people behind it and the energy that ties our economy together and our homes together, and it provides the power that allows for our businesses to work. It allows me to work from home, as many people do now. It heats our buildings and our homes, and it's increasingly central to the kind of underpinnings of our economy. So I think it's a kind of an all-encompassing part of our lives and our economy, but one that's often misunderstood or not understood, and often just seen in glimpses with wires overhead, but it's a lot more than that.
Kevin, I'll ask you the same question.
Oh, I think you're on mute, Kevin.
So I would just build on what Chris said is, if the average person on the street were asked, say, Jimmy Kimmel went up with a microphone and said, "What's the grid mean to you?" I would hope that people think, it's not just using the plug in the wall to charge your iPhone or to, put the toaster oven on, but to think where that energy came from, but also how it flows to you. And it really is kind of the grid of the future that I always think of, because knowing the grid was so integrated in the early days between generation, the facilities that move that high voltage power to the transformers that get to the home. There's a lot of interconnectedness. And in the old style of the grid, there was very limited participation by all of us to really understand the grid and have a chance to influence it in terms of as a ratepayer or as a person affected by facilities or someone that enjoyed an upgrade because for some reason my microwave oven works better since they upgraded the power lines on my street, and those things do happen. But a lot of times people are so in the dark, not to use a power type term, but again, a lot of people are not aware of the grid because of its complexity, its interconnectedness. And I think the job is on us, particularly if there's any folks that are promoting an understanding of it in terms of its features and its future. It's on us to do a better job of communicating that.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to turn next to, in response to our audience poll question earlier this evening. So earlier this evening, we asked audience members to provide a word cloud or to provide some thoughts on when they thought of the grid. And these are just some of the key takeaways. There's words like transmission, towers, constrained is one that stands out to me. When you look at this word cloud, what do communities and individuals need to feel and hear to be included in the grid transmission planning process?
Yeah, Kevin, would you like to start?
I can certainly dive in because
Yeah.
actually seeing all those words highlighted, number one, is not surprising to me. Although spaghetti is not on my menu tonight, but I can certainly understand why someone would put that in because when you really drive down the street, it looks that way. And again, even if you had a moment to just look at a utility pole, um, there are so many um, people that attach to that pole, and it's not just power companies. So again, a lot of what I think we can do, and this is a great start, Nathan, and to be with Chris, is to try to take some of these terms that are somewhat highly technical, like when you talk about the two red highlighted one of transmission distribution, those to me as an engineer mean totally different things. One is I know that transmission operates, moves a lot of power across a long range at high voltage, but that's nowhere near able to be used by consumers. So then you have to step things down through transformers to make it useful at the distribution level. So again, just those two words popped out to me in terms of just the understanding of what we mean when we talk about the grid. But everything from infrastructure that needs to be upgraded and is to the ability to transmit it, because that's in fact what happens. It moves from point A to point B. Pricing, supply, and is the word demand on there? I mean, if you don't see supply, you better have some demand because they have to balance out. So those are my initial thoughts, you guys.
Great. Yeah, and Kevin, I'll just kind of build on that. I think the three words that jump out for me are rates, prices, and overtaxed, and that really kind of gets to the question of affordability, which I think is it goes hand in hand with the some of the technical uh, aspects that you were highlighting, Kevin. That there's so many pieces, particularly moving pieces, with the upgrades and the new transmission and new sources of clean energy coming onto the grid that are needed. But how is that going to affect ratepayers, and how is that going to affect businesses? And um, looking at understanding the way that the grid operates now, how it's going to operate over the coming 10 years with all the different aspects, and how that translates into prices that we pay on our monthly bills. I think that really jumps out for me.
I want to dive a little bit more into the sustainability, other words that jump out on this: sustainability, um, rates, distribution. And really, the question is, how does transmission play a role in ensuring that my lights stay on during the next heat wave, the next power winter storm that comes through, or during the next summer season when we are seeing these electrification goals becoming more of a reality?
I
So
I, I could
go ahead, Chris.
better, yeah, and I think the keeping the lights on is something I've experienced not only when I've lost power in my home, but I worked at Eversource during some extended power outages, and I know from my role on storm duty how desperate the situation can be for families and towns when the power goes out. And the question of how a project will keep my lights on during the next heat wave is a complex one, but we're building resilience into an increasingly complex system. And I think transmission upgrades let us move electricity from where it's generated to where it's needed most. And during a heat wave, that means shifting clean power from wind, solar, or hydro regions to population centers where there's the greatest demand and where demand spikes. And I worked on a recent Eversource project in Acushnet and Mattapoisett, which included a new transmission line that allows a lot more solar power to interconnect to the grid in Southeast Mass. And without those upgrades, the grid would become fragile, prices would rise, and the risk of blackouts during those summer peaks would be higher. And you see this with electric price spikes in the summer when idle coal and oil plants come online as a last resort during what is called peak load. And generating expensive power also brings with it a lot of air pollution. So I think, individual projects might not keep your individual lights at home on, but together the investments prevent outages or brownouts and keep the grid stable for everybody.
And I could add too, Nathan, I think, particularly mapping those two words, sustainability and infrastructure, together was actually smart on the people that did put those words out. Because, I'll just give one very precise example. In the town of Orleans a number of years ago, um, we, among many other municipalities throughout the region, through the Cape and Vineyard Electric Cooperative, advanced capped landfill solar projects. So unlike, what is referred to as behind the meter solar, where you might put it on your home and you're displacing load that would otherwise come from the grid, when you're putting in a large distributed energy resource, which a large landfill PV project is, the panels go on the site after the permitting and the engineering, but believe it or not, there was extensive infrastructure required to make that interconnection with the utility because of protection that's needed, because of balancing out with the system. And again, credit to the utilities for going from the old days to the new, because electrons are flowing in many different directions at many different times. So the folks in those control rooms today are monitoring a lot of different variables, more so than they ever used to. So that's why the investment in infrastructure, in fact, supports sustainability.
Kevin, that's a great segue into my next question. We know that there's several entities here in New England that play an active role in the planning and development of our electric grid. What tool, and specifically looking at state policymakers, what tools do states and state policymakers need to accelerate the transmission build out to meet our rising demand while still protecting communities? Chris, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a timely question. And, I think states like Massachusetts need two kinds of tools. The process tools, the process in place to plan and approve projects, and then the people to implement them, which is increasingly including municipalities and the general public in the process. And like we've talked about thus far, this is a very complicated endeavor we're all on and that we're all in together. And on the process side, Massachusetts is revising the way it's standardizing siting frameworks like the new site suitability guidance and consolidated permitting through the Energy Facility Siting Board and municipalities. And they're designed to bring more predictability and transparency so projects can move faster without shortcuts. And on the people side, the stakeholder engagement is shifting, I think, from reaction and single project reactions to more education and engagement. And the idea is that if communities understand early on why transmission is needed to keep hospitals and home offices and first responders running during extreme weather, for instance, I believe that they're more likely to engage more constructively. But engagement needs to be built around shared facts and timelines and not misunderstandings and misinformation. So I think having both the process tools and people engaged in the process are key to moving forward constructively and productively.
Yeah, I would,
Kevin, before I turn to you to answer that question, Chris, I'm wondering if you could expand upon that. As we know, projects come before communities, and there's a lot of questions about the benefits of transmission, energy generation projects. Who are the key stakeholders that you should be engaged in this process, and how should they be best engaged to become aware not only of the project but of the benefits of it?
Yeah, I think the most immediate group that comes to mind are those that the residents and the neighbors most directly impacted with any new infrastructure that's being put in. And what are the kind of community impacts, traffic impacts, environmental impacts that they're going to see, and they want to understand, and they want to understand if it's necessary. But then taking a step further out, it's the municipal leaders, the select boards, the conservation commissions, the planning boards, the folks who are already busy doing a lot of other things in running their municipalities, but then also are trying to understand and hear from their constituents uh, and do what's best for the town. And increasingly, that process, the municipal process, is going to become even more apparent with some local permitting reforms. So I think the direct abutters and neighbors, the municipalities and municipal leaders, and then just more broadly, like the Cape as a region, for instance, is tied together through the electric grid, and there's an interconnection between each of the towns through the current electric grid, but also the upgrades that are needed. And so, as regions and as a state within Massachusetts, I think those are the folks who need to be engaged, because maybe a single project doesn't occur in their town at any given time, but it's likely one will. And how do they connect together, and understanding the bigger context is important.
Yeah, if I can add, Nathan, I am so glad Chris hit on the public engagement. Because when we say stakeholders, what that means is someone has a vested interest in this outcome. Whether it be an old coal-fired power plant that they didn't want next to their backyard in Brayton Point many years ago, and that's gone, or a PV project that they see that's going over a parking lot that covers the school buses, and they actually can see that benefit, not only helping the school with their energy cost, but as a example of what students can now see, gee, this might be a field I want to get into to support more of this, and brings all the other societal benefits of, cooling and use of pavement space that would otherwise be underutilized. So I also give credit, to, that kind of speaks to the motivation to have stakeholders show up. You've got to give them something. You've got to give them a reason to show up. And again, to what Chris mentioned in terms of more involvement from stakeholders at the municipal level in the 2024 Climate Act, specifically on the siting and permitting upgrades. The state has invested technical resources and funding to help municipalities just to be able to ask the right questions. And a lot of times, everybody's so busy, going through budget or capital planning. This is the last thing on anyone's radar. But at the same time, if there's someone that's kind of an ombudsman, somebody to help maybe ask those questions, and then, I know Eversource has come and met with us at the select board level and sit down and go through what grid mod is looking like in the next 10 years. And again, speaking of grid mod, again, built way back in the Municipal Modernization Act that was done many years ago, they created what's called the Grid Mod Advisory, I think it's council. And that truly brought together the utilities, stakeholders, and put staff onto the topics to hear from the public in the way the public wanted to respond, whether it be through webinars, showing up, or just sending comments in. And I give DOER, the State Energy Office, incredible compliments, because they gelled down, as Chris, you were involved in those processes, thousands and thousands of ideas and questions that came in, put them in by topics, and the utility responded. And this was the first. So I'm anxious to see how the next 5-year review on grid mod proceedings goes, because I think, we're in a mode of learning as we go, but also listening, which is a big change from the past.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to turn it over to an audience question. And as a reminder, if anyone in attendance has any question, please place it into the Q&A function. The question from the audience is, how do we connect transmission and reliability to affordability, such as lowering electric rates? Obviously, this is a very big issue in Massachusetts. The governor has filed affordability legislation that is currently working through the legislative process. I'm wondering how both of you address this question.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that's becoming more and more important and apparent. And I think in a few ways, first and foremost, I think making sure that the transmission upgrades and the new lines that are built, the new substations that are built, are done, are necessary and not overbuilt. That alternatives, not what they sometimes call non-wired alternatives, maybe upgrading conductors on an existing line, or looking at other ways of addressing the peak loads on the system, demand response, reducing power demand during critical periods, or uh, uh, using other means to reduce the load without building new transmission. That those are all rigorously examined in a way that the public has the confidence that yes, this project being proposed uh, is is in fact necessary. And then on the other side, I think there will be more opportunities. I think the state is just rolling out a new program where um, you can have bi-directional charging or two-way charging with your electric vehicle. So I have an electric vehicle, and in the future, during the peak time of day, I could actually be selling power from my car's battery onto the grid, providing I'd be a small generator. Or if you have a battery in your garage, that you'd be able to provide power on and actually make money off of that, or reduce the demand on the overall grid. So I think having more transparency and ability for consumers to be able to participate in the operating of the grid, as well as having confidence that what has to be built is actually being done right and being done in the most cost-effective way.
And I would add, Nathan, too, I think we are still in the early stages of um, evaluating, as Chris said, non-wires alternatives, so that we are not just investing in high voltage transmission lines, but is there still the opportunity to right size our homes? So our load, starting with the initial load that is sized for that connection to your distribution system and ultimately fed through transmission, is right sized. Are we doing every energy efficiency measure we can? And I'll tell you, with the Mass Save program, there's actually absolutely no reason why someone should not be taking full advantage of it, because you pay for it. But I think the other thing that is really interesting, and it kind of is a non-wires alternative, a number of years ago, Eversource developed and placed in Provincetown, Massachusetts, their Outer Cape battery energy storage project. Um, that actually is um, um, uh, kind of an example of investing significant dollars. It needed the space, it needed the design, the standards. It was testing some new fundamentals that are still yet to be fully explored, but it avoided a transmission line upgrade pretty much from Eastham all the way through Wellfleet, Truro to Provincetown, saving millions of dollars. So these things are all evaluated, but I do think there's still so many things we don't know, and we're still learning. Like, could that peak capacity out of that storage, which I think is in the order of 25 megawatts, this is like a mini power plant if you look at it. It can only put out power for a certain number of hours, but is there a way of more fully exercising that in a way that it's more of a mini power plant as opposed to a resource that's standing to make sure the lights stay on in, the Outer Cape. So we are definitely in an exciting time, and a transition that the more people participate, I think the more we'll learn and make for a better grid of the future.
Let's explore this uh, non-wires alternative. An audience member asked, if we were to expand DER, mostly solar and battery, to distributed more evenly and locally, wouldn't that reduce the need for increased transmission? Kevin, I think this is one that fits right up your alley and what you've been describing.
And I'll tell you, I think we're literally on the cusp of that happening because of so many things coming together. I think by 2028, Eversource will, throughout their entire distribution areas, both the west as well as their eastern side, have smart meters. Um, and having that data, which is an enormous undertaking, just to build the backbone infrastructure, we're talking data centers to be able to store, all that data is then going to make it much more visible to all of us to then create almost like virtual power plants. So we can actually group our little resources together, maybe down my street to say, as we're monitoring use and flow, actually being a resource to the grid. This is coming, you guys. It really is.
Yeah, and I would add, I alluded to the project in Mattapoisett and Acushnet, and that I think was the first. It was an EverSource. It is an EverSource transmission project, a 115 kV project, but it's specifically designed to enable distributed energy resources to be built and to tie into the grid in Southeast Mass. And without that line, it there was a cap, a hard cap on new solar. So there is a certain amount of grid backbone you need in order to unlock distributed energy resources and move power depending on the demand or time of day or time of year. But that I'd encourage folks to look at that petition at the DPU, and there was a lot of discussion about how many more projects could interconnect, how many megawatts of solar and battery storage can be tied in because of this investment. And so it was a very robust discussion of that balance we're talking about new transmission or transmission upgrades paired with clean energy generation, and then efficiently moving power around when it's needed.
Thank you, Chris. Again, if anyone from the audience has any questions, please place it in the Q&A. I have two more questions for the both of you. Both are looking at a higher level and to the future. If you could change one small but powerful thing about local permitting or the engagement process, what would most improve outcomes for communities? So this could be either getting how projects get approved, how proponents of projects and communities get engaged, how information is disseminated. A very open floor.
I can jump into one that's very unique to just a certain portion of Cape Cod. And I don't know if any folks listening will chuckle about this, but we have something called the Old Kings Highway Historic District. It's a section of the Cape that represents towns, properties that are north of the Mid Cape Highway. There is a challenge of installing photovoltaic panels that are viewed from the street in that precious district. And that would be one thing I would like to have people eventually come around to say they fit beautifully on a roof. We as a community can adapt to and find this visually appealing as opposed to negative to the historical character of our communities. I'd like that change to happen, and it should have happened like 10 years ago.
Yeah, that having worked on some solar siting projects in parts of Massachusetts that are very scenic, I think that you touch on a really important point, Kevin. I think I would add what I would like to see and what I would hope is, particularly with some of the changes that are being proposed uh, with the 2024 Climate Act and the regulations and guidance, is that there's more engagement, but there's also more uh, embracing of facts and and different perspectives, and less reliance on for lack of a better term, misinformation. And there is a tremendous amount of complexity to the projects we're talking about. But I think there's also a a willingness to embrace things that are just factually wrong. And we can disagree over a project or over its merits or over its impacts, and that's the process. But agreeing to accept facts that are put forward and that are supported by um, science and research and good sources, I think that's critical to having a honest, robust uh, engagement process that leads to um, uh, building trust, building a kind of a shared understanding that yes, we may disagree and maybe it's not exactly the way I wanted it to turn out, but we can agree on the facts surrounding it.
I think that's a really good way to pivot into this next audience question. We know that it takes a long time to get transmission projects built. So, should government, whether states or regional organizations, establish a group to solve this issue to efficiently build projects in a coordinated manner, like we've seen in the sciences or in other fields?
I can take a stab first. Chris, you may want to come
Mhm.
in, but again, back to my recall of exactly where I was in the first Great Northeast Blackout in 1965, that actually did create coordinating councils across the United States. Those then are made up by either transmission operators, or in our case, we have the ISO New England independent system operator that pretty much does view all of the transmission lines that each of the investor-owned utilities actually own and pretty much turn over to ISO New England to operate as one bulk power unit. So we do have quite a bit of coordination, but to the question relative to how do we advance transmission projects quicker, that in fact did come out of and is in the regulatory drafting stage right now to improve the permitting regulations both at a small clean energy scale, to accelerate the local approval of small scale solar and distributed energy projects, but also at the siting board in terms of accelerating that process to actually put hard deadlines when everything is administratively complete, to use that overused term. If they've got all the information on the record, if regs get finalized in literally a number of months, there will be some hard deadlines of when decisions must get issued. So I think we are seeing an effort to do that. And I'd also say, don't lose sight of the opportunity for participation as well. So, as the deadlines may be getting tighter for approving these, I don't ever want people to feel that then the utilities are just blowing through the public and not giving stakeholder engagement. There is a balancing and an encouragement for the opportunity to provide more stakeholder engagement, as I mentioned before, with technical resources so that somebody can help you navigate what can be a complicated regulatory framework.
Great. Yeah, and I would add to that, Kevin, that there are some very important discussions and plans coming out of the New England states, coordinating transmission planning, um, and also tying in with New York and Canada. There's a conference next month, the coordination between with Canada and New England over energy issues. We're blessed by having a you know, very strong ISO New England and very strong leadership in states, but there are different priorities in different states, and so coming to an agreement over very fine grained plans is difficult. But I think the recognition of the need for regional planning and the inner ISO planning between ISO New England and New York ISO for interstate transmission or interregional transmission there, it has been recognized, and there is work being done. I think more could be done at the federal level. There was some very important work that's now not moving forward as fast because of changes in DC. But I think the New England states and Massachusetts are going to continue to provide leadership within the region and coordinating with New York. And so I think that will continue to grow and will provide benefits to making sure that what's built in Massachusetts it ties into a broader logic. And getting to the questions we had, is it needed? Is it being done at the most price competitive way? Is it going to serve kind of longer goals? I think that those important discussions are happening.
And I also have to add on to what Chris mentioned too, in terms of let's, recognize, as you mentioned, our Canadian interties that we have with Hydro-Quebec. I mean, these go way back. I believe to 1971 was the first Hydro-Quebec high voltage direct current line that went into operation, a significant exchange point to take, cleaner generation from hydro. That's basically water through dam structures that generate electricity and turbines across extensive lines using DC voltage. The house current that you have is alternating current. DC allows a much more efficient linkage for the flow of electricity. So again, we need to, as Chris mentioned, explore more of these interties, but let's build on and maybe expand what has been working so well for many, many decades.
Thank you both. I want to ask one final question this evening. We've talked a lot about transmission planning and interactions with communities from the state perspective and the local perspective, and how there are there's alternatives that are currently being considered. I want us all to fast forward 10 years to the year 2035. If we get transmission right, whether it's the build out of new transmission lines or non-wires alternatives or grid enhancing technologies, what will that look like? What will be different for families and businesses in the community?
Well, I could start off, Kevin. I think 10 years from now, if we get this right, the electric grid will be more reliable, more local, and more transparent. And I think families will have experienced fewer outages, lower price volatility, and more ways to manage their energy use and costs through smart meters and devices and other clean energy programs. I think businesses will be able to benefit from more predictable interconnections for a new facility or for their own clean energy sources on site, and provide more clean, affordable power that supports economic growth. I think communities will have clear visibility in who pays for what and what the tangible benefits are, like host community benefits tied to transmission upgrades, new jobs that are unleashed for both developing the energy, but also supporting the economy that relies on the electric power. And I think the technical side will continue to be complex, but I think the outcome will be simple: a grid that works for people, where residents can see both their environmental and financial impacts and understand the process and be kind of a full participant, not just an end user who turns on the lights and pays the bill.
I would echo all of that and just say, look back at just the last 5 years, because you asked us to
Yeah.
project, way out there. But, we're talking about before, during, and after COVID. So we know the changes that have occurred that we're now using that we did not even have 5 years ago. We have AI tools that are accelerating our, access to information, as long as we're carefully screening the results. But my short answer is I just want to see that future where more of us are participating. And that doesn't mean we have to actually change switches and things every day. You can be an active participant or a passive participant, but knowing that you are contributing to a grid that is, as Chris said, more resilient, more efficient, brings cost controls for us so we avoid these spikes that we do see between seasonality. Why should we have winter pricing and summer pricing? It's like we're all trying to just get through life, enjoy, have some fun, get some rewards because, that's what it's about at the end of the day. When that bill shows up, I don't want surprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris and Kevin. This was really an illuminating conversation. Please thank me in joining our panel for this evening. Before we go, please save the date for our fourth Renew on the Line webinar. We'll be discussing battery storage. Mark your calendars for Wednesday, November 19th at 6:30 p.m. Details will be available soon. Thank you for attending and have a wonderful evening.